Now we will get from a professional community of biologists to community of non-professionals a bit. Citizen science is a collaborative, transdisciplinary practice that engages society in scientific research across a wide range of areas of application. And our next speaker, Margaret Gold, has already experienced a lot and achieved a lot when it comes to an issue of engaging the general public to scientific activities. For example, at the National History Museum in London, she invited the public to help transcribe playable data for each specimen there in order to make it fully available for professional research. Today, she is the coordinator of the Citizen Science Lab at Leiden University and the program manager of Citizen Science at the Program for Open Science in Netherlands. So this is Margaret Gold and her presentation.
Thank you very much, Martina, for that lovely introduction. Pavel, it's fun to follow you as a fellow big fan of hack days and hackathons. So thank you for promoting this brilliant way for everybody to get hands-on with moving useful tools and software further forward. Before I turn on my slide share, I'm just going to stick a link into the YouTube chat before that disappears from my view, which we will need later on in the session today. And with that, I will now switch over to my PowerPoint and get that started. So as Martina kindly introduced, whoops, that's not my first screen. Sorry to blind you all with the scroll through to my first slide. It was not at the starting point. My apologies. Here we go, there's the starting point. My apologies for making you dizzy as I went through to the correct starting point. So as Martina very kindly introduced, I work at Leiden University and I'm coordinator of the Citizen Science Lab there. And it's my pleasure to talk a little bit today about the role that citizen science plays in open science and in open innovation as well. The key theme for citizen science is it steps outside of the academic towers and places where research and innovation happen and makes a much stronger connection with society, with a nice theme, science for all and all for science. To give you a little introduction of the Citizen Science Lab at Leiden University, we connect with all 7 faculties of the university. We are at the heart of the university as a transdisciplinary center. And we have a wide range of expertise in citizen science within each of those faculties. So researchers that are engaging the public in their research, inviting them to take part, inviting them to help process data, help collect data. And these are all making a tangible and important contribution towards new knowledge and new scientific discovery. At the Citizen Science Lab, we function as a knowledge hub for sharing know-how about doing citizen science and do research into the science of citizen science. And we're also a project incubator. We facilitate the design and launch of new projects in partnership with research colleagues, both in the university and across Europe, but also in partnership with societal partners. Citizen science is many different terms. We've skipped some here, sorry. A brief introduction to citizen science now. Citizen science is a very handy umbrella term. It's very useful for finding each other in the field, to find other research, to find examples of other projects, to find examples of researchers or citizen science practitioners that are using these approaches. But there's very many different terms that you'll come across underneath this. It's also applied in very many different domains of doing research. And that terminology also attaches. You can have volunteer mapping, you can have observation, biology and biodiversity observations. Many of these terminologies also fall under the wider umbrella of citizen science. And because of this, there are just as many definitions of what citizen science is. And it's a classic case of 12 economists in a room results in 13 definitions and 13 theories of economics. Citizen science is very similar. The quest to come up with a perfect sentence that encapsulates all of the aspects of citizen science, almost by definition, leaves something out. And it's actually an approach that's about inclusion, not about drawing tight lines. So the best place to turn to get a sense of what citizen science is all about is actually the 10 principles of citizen science, which was developed by a large group of practitioners across Europe in the field of citizen science, to really define what the most important aspects are for doing it well, what you should be considering. And these give us our red thread throughout all types of citizen science initiatives. The first of these is that, I'm skipping slides for some reason, citizen science projects actively involve citizens in scientific endeavor, and that this generates new knowledge or new understanding. And actually, it's the scientists that may or may not be involved. Citizens are always involved in citizen science, and they can contribute in many different ways. Also, citizen science projects have a genuine science outcome, and this can be new research or publications, but it can also be, it could be a data that leads to a conservation action or environmental management decision or any other kind of a policy decision. And one of the other important principles that's at the heart of any citizen science initiative is that all participants benefit from taking part. So this is about balance, and this is about the impact, but it's also about your motivations for taking part and what comes out of the whole process. So the participants also have a motivation to be involved, and they benefit from being involved. And we can see that citizen science is applied across the entire research journey. So from even setting the research questions all the way to sharing the results. And we have different types of typologies of citizen science projects. The most well-known are contributory. People are involved in helping to collect data or to process data. Increasingly, citizen science projects are much more collaborative, where the people that are participating that are helping to define the approach, helping to define the tools, helping to define even the research question. And then we also have citizen science initiatives that are co-created right from the very start. So the people that are getting involved in participating in the research are part of the formation of the entire research initiative. And these also reflect different levels of engagement of what it is that you're doing in the research. They can be very simple crowdsourcing where you don't have that much strong contact with the underlying research, all the way to the very co-created approaches. So extreme citizen science, not meaning the location is extreme or the research is extreme, but that the level of collaboration is completely from the start throughout the entire cycle. And I'll have some examples a little bit later in the talk about these different levels. But you can see these different levels also as a kind of a participation escalator, similar to the participation ladder, which some of you may be familiar with, Arnstein's participation ladder, where people can be involved in a very light touch way with science or science research or science knowledge, science understanding, to very deep engagement, even doing your own citizen science in a DIY way. And if we link that to some examples, we have a very large population in EU of residents of EU, citizens of EU nations, of which you could say a small proportion visit any given science museum or go have some kind of a touch point with science being communicated to the public. People being a smaller number being involved in a fairly widely available online citizen science project, to people doing volunteer computing, to people sharing bird observations, to people doing their own DIY biology, particularly in synthetic biology. So here we can see the participation gets deeper and deeper. So we can be talking about citizen science that's more in the continuum of just science communication, science outreach, to things that are very hands-on and exploring your own scientific research questions. Citizen science as a field has largely been growing thanks to technology developments. We all carry a highly sophisticated sensor and computing device in our pockets these days. Even the low-end phones tend to have quite good smartphone technology on them. It's getting increasingly hard to find a telephone that does not have a touch screen, even at the low end of the range. And these are excellent fields, data gathering and observation devices, including onboard sensors. And of course, the internet, which is connecting us in communication with each other, but the sharing of data, the processing of data, and the things that we can do online that also helps move science forward. Some of this boom in citizen science is also coming from the commons-based peer production. If we think back to the very first internet boom, the dot-com boom, those of you that are old enough to remember the first proliferation of online platforms where people could be sharing content that they created themselves and that the development of open licensing around this was developed to say that this is free to share, but you have to attribute me or cite me, or it's free to reuse, but not for commercial purposes. Almost all of these examples having a nonprofit motive and all about the network value. The more that we share, the more value it has, the more open it is, the more value it has, and led to things such as Wikipedia, which has turned into one of the most amazing resources for knowledge, although it's kept up to date by a very small, highly active number of users. Its reach is extremely wide. These early thinkings talked about Wikinomics, how everybody collaborating together is increasing value, is the shared value, and also crowdsourcing, the power of the crowd. When a large number of people gather together to assist with something, that we move things forward that wouldn't otherwise be possible. It is also out of these movements that citizen science is increasingly growing and booming. We can see this growth in the scientific literature. This is a snapshot that's no longer quite so recent. It's from 2016, but showing that citizen science approaches being referenced in the scientific literature is growing. But we can also see that the number of citizen science projects are growing. This is a snapshot from the SciStarter platform, which is a great way to discover citizen science projects that you can get involved in. This is a total live list rather than an aggregated list. And there's also an increasing number of citizen science professional associations around the world, where as a citizen science practitioner, you can share knowledge and connect with others in the field who are doing citizen science as a project coordinator or initiator, or as an educator applying citizen science in a classroom or educational setting. And also a large number of platforms where you can find projects and resources for doing citizen science as a practice. There's a very wide range of impacts that are being recognized and measured and evaluated and reported on from citizen science initiatives, roughly falling into these four categories. Just to highlight one, for example, the quality or the quantity of specific natural resources or ecosystems is being enriched by citizen science initiatives. The health research, the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment here in the Netherlands has also listed a large number of impacts that they see, benefits that they see for doing citizen science and introducing citizen science approaches in their own research and engaging with the public in that. Just to pull out a few examples, that citizen science allows them to introduce new sources of information and knowledge and perspectives, lay knowledge, lived experience, traditional knowledge, historical knowledge. All of these now become accessible and part of scientific knowledge creation. And to highlight one of them here, that the focus of research becomes much more relevant for the people that are engaging with it, that might be the subject of the research, or might have a large impact from the outcomes of the research. Engaging them earlier makes it much more impactful and relevant to them. You can imagine how in the public health domain, this is particularly important. There's a great deal in the literature that talks about the benefits for participating. This is one of the principles of citizen science, that everybody that participates should benefit. And this includes for the researcher as well as for policy outcomes. Just to highlight the benefits for a science aspect of this, is that a large amounts of data can be gathered that might not otherwise be possible to gather, or data could be processed at a scale and a volume that might not otherwise be possible for an individual researcher to do. But also that the research questions become much closer to societal knowledge and societal relevance. And the flip side of that, by engaging with people early and involving them throughout the whole process and allowing them to shape it, the acceptance of the results also increases, and the awareness of the issues at stake increases. And it promotes a sense of awareness of the scientific method and the role of expertise, the role of science, and a level of comfort with new information requiring you to reassess and reanalyze what it is that you're researching, what it is that you're drawing conclusions about. And we've seen this absolutely and highlighted these past 2 years as many of our countries have had excellent science communicators talking about what's coming to be understood about COVID and what the national approaches have been to that based on new information emerging, and needing to shift to take that into account as we go along. And also learning aspects by participating in citizen science. Both sides of the equation, both the scientists and the participants, can have a very large learning impact at the heart of that. And just to zoom in on the side of the participants, their scientific literacy can be increased quite substantially by participating in these projects. Not only the specific area of science or research being investigated, but how scientific habits of mind work, critical thinking. And then within each domain of research, there are very specific impacts and very specific benefits that accrue. So in the case of a public health citizen science initiative that's engaging with people about health concerns in a local community or around a particular illness, one of the very real impacts is that those that are participating are empowered to take much more action for themselves towards a healthier life, partially through raised awareness of the issues, but also through the early feedback of the data that's being gathered and the pattern emerging about what you can actually do to take action. There's also, to some degree, there's a monetary value of participation, although I would caution against seeing citizen science approaches as a way of saving money for gathering data. It does not mean that they are less expensive an approach to doing science, but there's a real tangible value in kind to the participation of so many people in gathering or processing data that would simply not otherwise be possible. And these two pieces of research really looked at what the tangible value is of that, which is quite substantial when you look at it at scale. But much more importantly is the contribution of the data itself. So if we take the example of biodiversity data, and this is a snapshot of the GBIF repository. This is the Global Biodiversity Index Fund. I believe this is a 2016 snapshot, so it's even larger than this by now. But if you look at the number of biodiversity records that are contributed to this in the aggregate, and how the data comes into the repository, where it comes from, a really significant portion come from citizen science, and not initiatives per se, but the tools for citizens to be helping gather and contribute biodiversity data, iNaturalist being one of the biggest examples. And these in turn have a very real impact on environmental policy. This is a piece of research that was done looking at how data gathered by citizens was contributing directly to environmental decision-making, environmental policy-making, biodiversity, nature being predominant in this case, but still a lot of other domains of environmental policy-making were being informed in part by citizen science data. And then at the global scale, at the Sustainable Development Goals, citizen science approaches are contributing very tangibly to these as well. Two recent pieces of research did a very deep dive into exactly what underlying data that feeds into the measurement of the indicators and the targets and the Sustainable Development Goals are actually coming from citizen science initiatives. The indicators themselves have 3 different levels of data that are underpinning them and the degree to which that data is very clearly defined. And there's a way of gathering data for measuring whether we're on target or not for any of the targets within the Sustainable Development Goals. But there's a whole body for which also there are no data identified yet to measure this, the tier 3. And if we look at this pale blue line of just how many of the goals still have undefined data underpinning the indicators and the targets, it helps us understand exactly the role that citizen science could be playing towards helping measure these indicators and contributing to moving the needle forward on all of our sustainable development goals. These are some of the non-traditional data sources that can be turned to fill in those gaps, including citizen-generated data. And there are very specific dimensions to which citizen science can therefore contribute. And this is the picture that illustrates it the best from this deep dive in the underlying data sources for each of the Sustainable Development Goals, which you can see in the column along the side. These are each of the targets, and the green boxes are indicating where citizen science data is formally and officially contributing to the measurements of those indicators. The yellow boxes are where citizen science has the potential to, either in citizen science projects that are already actively ongoing, the black outline, which could be lined up with the official data sources, or in yellow, where citizen science approaches are very appropriate and tangibly possible for measuring that data. And gray is where there's not a match with citizen science approaches for those types of data. So just to highlight a really tangible example for you, within the Sustainable Goal 15 about the conservation of freshwater ecosystems, within target 15.1, the indicator is the red list index that captures the risk of extinction over time of a wide variety of groups. And this red list index data is being fed by citizen science projects such as the eBird platform, where anybody can contribute data about bird spottings, but particularly highlighting birds at risk and ecosystems at risk and populations at risk. And this is trained eBird volunteers, but when I say training, it's something that all of us here watching on YouTube today could very easily get a minimal amount of training to know what you're spotting, what to describe about the ecosystem, and the details to share around this, and in this way contribute very significantly. So the role that citizen science plays in open science is quite an important one. It's increasingly seen as one of the pillars of open science. If you take this view of what open science is about, transdisciplinary research is very much part of it, but it's also about opening up the pathways for science so that it's not only top down, but also bottom up, and that it can be co-created with partners in society, and that there's ways for people from all walks of life to engage with scientific processes. So not just that the outcomes are open, but the whole process itself is open. And this fits, for those of you that are coming from a more innovation and R&D background, this fits very much with movement towards open innovation. You'll recognize quite a few of these diagrams, I imagine, about the open innovation funnel, where inputs are coming outside the firm, where partnerships and collaborations are enriching the value of the innovation and the value of the collaboration, and that it's in many ways it's tied also to the market impact and the need in the market and what it can actually deliver to all participants. The theme here being that these processes are being opened up, the boundaries are being opened up, and that it has shared value for all who are collaborating within these processes. And this is once again what citizen science is bringing into open science, this inclusiveness, this collaboration and opening up of the outer edges so that all can participate. And just to connect it also with the movement for responsible research and innovation, RRI, which many of you that are in projects at the European Union level or possibly Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe funded projects, you may be familiar with the term responsible research and innovation, which is part of this picture as well. If we look at the global level of what the movement that's happening for open science, particularly the UNESCO recommendations for open science, which is very active at the moment on making a specific range of recommendations for open science globally. And just to pull out some of the main themes of these recommendations is that scientific knowledge is openly available for everyone, that scientific collaborations benefit science and society. The process of scientific knowledge creation itself is opened up. So the whole process is opened up, and that societal actors outside of traditional and formal scientific or research communities can be engaged in this, and that there's an open engagement and open dialogue throughout. And if we look at the pillars of what makes up open science, you see very clearly that the role that citizen science plays in opening up these processes and engaging with society in the very early stages. So not just an afterthought that the publications are open or that science communication is engaged in, but that society is involved at a very early stage. And if you're interested in this, I encourage you to read the UNESCO briefing that came from the citizen science community within open science, with feedback specifically to the UNESCO recommendations for open science. So sadly, we're joining each other virtually today. We're not yet together in person, but I thought it would be nice if we had a little bit of a moment to connect with each other if possible. So we're going to try this without the benefit of being able to do breakout rooms with each other. We're going to try to do this virtually by opening up another browser tab or browser window, if you could. We're going to have this Padlet as a place where we can connect alongside listening today in the YouTube channel. So I invite you to open up this link. There you will find this Padlet. What you will find on this Padlet is in the columns a replication of the various stages of the research process, the different stages at which citizens can be engaged in a variety of ways in citizen science approaches. The way that the Padlet works is under each of those columns, there's a little plus bar. That's where you can click and a box will pop open where you can add a comment, and then you can publish that comment. And what I'm inviting you to do is to have some thoughts within your own research processes, your own research focus, your own area of expertise, your own innovation processes. At what stages can you imagine that you might engage with societal actors or citizens or the public and involve them in that stage? I'd like you to just stop and have a look at those different stages. I'll give you all a moment to open the link. I hope that you're able to do so, even though we're not visually together with each other today. To open that link and start having some thoughts about how you might engage the public or society in those stages of research. And by sharing those comments, you can choose to log in or you can choose to remain anonymous. We can get a bit of a sense of what people are working on and what their ideas are, and maybe can spark some ideas for yourself as well as others share their ideas about how they might engage with others. But I'd like you to leave that open and have ideas as we go along. I'm going to continue and introduce some examples for you of different citizen science initiatives following the levels of engagement. So following, I'll show the structure in a moment, but following that, I'm going to give some examples. And I encourage you to continue to have some thoughts, see if any of that sparks ideas for how you might introduce citizen science approaches in your own work as part of your open science practices, an opportunity to make the full process open and engaging for all. So just starting with some very deep historical examples, citizen science, although not using that term in the first instance, goes very, very far back. This is an example of telegram contributions of bird sightings, individuals who were sharing the sighting of birds in the spring, tracking bird migratory patterns, going back to the early 1800s, that have been contributing to the study of bird migration patterns and also weather impacts on bird migration, some of the earliest examples of citizen science. And also in ancient Japan, going back to the era that we see pictured in this picture, during the time of the spring cherry blossoms, which is a societal and culturally important moment in Japan where people gather together for picnics and games under the beautiful cherry blossoms. There was, back in the early 1800s already, there was a reporting network for cherry blossom sightings that allowed, in the aggregate, a map to be able to share it on a timely basis of where can you find the blossoms, where are they about to emerge, where in the country are the patterns of the cherry blossoms. And to this day, this map, the cherry blossom forecast, continues to exist, and individuals continue to contribute their cherry blossom sighting data to this map. So this is the typology that I'd like to explore with you with some examples, looking at the levels of engagement within the citizen science, within the research initiative, and the ways in which you can involve people. Starting with crowdsourcing, which is citizens as sensors or volunteer computing. The volunteer computing example that you might be familiar with is that of SETI at Home. It's built on the BOINC virtual machine server. It's volunteer computing, so you can install the virtual machine on your own machine, and when you're not using your computer CPU, you can be donating it to the crunching of these numbers. In this case, it's a snapshot from SETI at Home, but also BOINC is being used to help do environmental data modeling and a wide range of other computing power intensive projects where you could be contributing your CPU and also also there are applications that can run on your phone as well. You can also be donating your telephone computing power to these massive grid computing projects. No, I'm not clicking through. Another example is diffusion tubes as a tool for measuring air quality. This is an example of a project here, a poster in Flemish for the residents of Antwerpen who can contribute to the Curious Noses project. This was a data gathering initiative that reached the entire city. A huge percentage of residents engaged with this simply by putting a poster outside their window that had glued a diffusion tube on the inside of it to help collect air quality data. These were then sent into the lab, and and the analysis happened in the lab. And the data gathered helped inform air quality prediction modeling and throughout the city, but also at a three-dimensional level, as well as pockets where formal measurement devices were not reaching. So a level of distance from the science itself, it was simply a diffusion tube you placed outside your window, but you made a very real contribution towards a data picture that informed public decision-making, street design, traffic design, etc. Another example of the citizen as a sensor, or passive sensing, are wildlife motion trigger camera traps, where you can set up something in your own backyard to just see what birds are visiting you, what wildlife is visiting you. And this data can be contributed and shared on platforms such as MammalWeb to contribute to an overall picture of what animals can be filed where, although this may largely be for your own interest and curiosity and to see what wildlife you can be supporting locally. Or another example where the Great American Gut Project, where people sent in samples of their own microbiome to contribute to an understanding of what does a healthy microbiome look like. Distributed intelligence projects are where the participant is much more engaged in using their thinking power, their pattern recognition power. One of the great examples is the Zooniverse platform, which was developed to invite people to help process the data that was in images from the very first project was from the Sloan Deep Sky Survey, where millions of photos, millions of images were captured. And a computer can isolate the pinprick of light in the photo, but really you need human pattern recognition to be able to identify what is in the photo. In this more recent project that was looking at the surface of Mars, the latest snapshot that I had of it was that close to 75,000 individuals engaged with looking at these images on the surface of Mars to identify the markings that showed the direction that wind was going in. So these are dust markings or wind pattern markings on the surface. And by identifying these and other shadow indications of shadows, the researchers were able to identify and map. Everything that is in red marked here is a new identification, is new knowledge about the surface of Mars, which became named and described in the literature and contributed to really big advances in scientific knowledge about the surface of Mars. Another example is cancer cell research, taking microscopic images, and the public were invited to draw the outline of where they saw the shape of the cell. And this made a really significant contribution to understanding cell structure, cancer cell structures, and healthy cells versus cancerous cells. So once again, drawing on people's pattern recognition ability. Participatory science. This one got skipped. The folded game. This is a protein folding game that drew on people's trial and error, puzzle solving, gaming abilities, but following some basic underlying rules, the scientific rules of how proteins fold. People could get engaged with protein folding in a particular way. And solving different puzzles, sometimes puzzles that were set. In the case of COVID-19, there were two specific COVID-19 folding puzzles that were set as challenges for the public, but also to tinker around, and new discoveries have been made and published as a result of people playing this game. So perhaps the most famous and well-known examples of citizen science are the data collection examples of participatory science. So these are the ones that primarily you can be doing, for example, on your mobile phone, where you can be anywhere in the world and capturing an observation with some field information around that observation, perhaps a photo, GPS location data attached to that. There are ones that take place annually where you're invited at a particular time of year to spend some time capturing these, or it can be serendipitous and just while you're out for a walk or you're in a place and you have that time that you can be capturing some of these observations and sharing them while you're out about. Opportunistic contributions. But also there are very dedicated local ones. So here a snapshot example of the Swiss platform for citizen science, where where a number of projects are shared that are highly localized that you can do in your own neighborhood. If you happen to live in the city of Bern, for example, you can contribute to an index of wild plants and wildflowers across the city that helps to understand where the hidden green spots are, as well as where opportunities for more green could be hidden in the city. Or here also across Switzerland, you could contribute in various ways to water quality research across a very large range of data points, including spotting plastic pollution in the water. But participatory science is much broader than that as well. It can also go to participating in the problem definition. And some of the most recent examples of EU funded out of FRIES in 2020 and the SWAFS program, citizen science projects and citizen observatory initiatives have this kind of a characteristic where it's at a very early stage of defining what will be measured and to what purpose. A wide variety of stakeholders are brought around the table in a co-creation process that defines the what will be looked at, what will be measured, how it will be measured, and what policy decisions or environmental management decisions will it feed into, therefore meeting the needs of policymakers in their dashboards, or meeting the needs of local environmental protection agencies or any other local authorities, but also the citizens that are facing an issue in very well facilitated processes. So just to give you a few glimpses of this, also in the context of responding to the COVID crisis and the impact that it had on mental health within individuals that already had a mental health concern and their families and carers around them, and co-designing how they can design interventions and support networks to respond to the COVID crisis impacts of that. Or on odor observatories, the DNOSIS project, which has just had its final conference, reporting on some of the pilots across various places in Europe, where a co-creation approach was engaging with a wide range of stakeholders in that location around issues of odor, also engaging with industry and local businesses to approach those together. Mapping together with communities to identify what is the issue about air quality in a local area, identifying who the stakeholders are that you need to get involved, collecting the data, and then presenting that data back to the policymakers for decision makings about how transport is rerouted, where businesses are placed, how schools can be protected with air quality issues. All of these are examples. And then extreme citizen science, as I mentioned earlier, not meaning that the approach is that the type of science is extreme or the location is extreme, but that it's really co-created from the start by the participants. And one of the greatest examples was during the crisis in Japan, when the tsunami caused the nuclear processing facility to leak radiation into the atmosphere, and the Japanese official authorities were very hesitant to release this data because they didn't want people to panic. But there was a strong sense by people on the ground that they were not getting the information or data that they needed to support their own decision making. A very large group of two different bodies of people. Some were software developers that developed an interactive safe casting online platform where you could report your own measurements, and then other group hardware hackers came up with a way of building your own Geiger counter, your own radiation counter in a little tin of mints, using low-end sensors that were widely available. And those two DIY movements matched together made it possible for people to contribute their own radiation measurements. which became the most complete and the most detailed data at that time for almost a full year. This was the most complete data, and people had much more reliance and confidence in this data that was shared by a wide community of participants until the authorities caught up with this, and it was much more aligned with them, with authoritative data, but completely self-created by the community. Or in the case of an oil spill off of the coast of the US, a group of open scientists, hardware hackers, designed their own balloon mapping kit, which they found funding for on Kickstarter, to map the areas that there were oil spills and take these balloon images of where the oil spill was reaching, so that they themselves as volunteers could organize actions on the ground to clean up as much of that as possible where it was coming into wildlife nature areas, partially because they felt it was being underreported by the authorities, but also because they wanted to be able to inform their own actions to address this, including developing a new online tool for stitching these photographs together in order to make a more complete map. And then finally, citizen science, where the people help design not only the question that be researched, but also the interface and the data collection method to be able to meet their own needs. This is a group of people that were in hunter-gatherers in the Congo, I believe, were being worked with UCL researchers at the Excites group, but also the anthropology group, to literally map the areas for which they had the rights, legal rights and protections, but the area was literally not mapped. And they themselves designed their own visual interface to indicate this is a source of food, this is of religious importance, this is historical importance, this is ancestral. And with their own devices, they were able to map their own areas to strengthen the protections that they did have, in fact, under law, but completely designed by the people with the support, the people on the ground with the support of scientists and researchers, serving them and their needs. Just going to check with Martina how I'm doing on time, because I'm aware that we got off a little bit to a late start. But I just want to close with sharing some resources with you. The resource that I want to make sure that you know about is the EU Citizen Science Platform, where you can find a range of projects and resources for doing citizen science as a practice. Just to make you aware of a range of very accessible books on the topic of citizen science that have a very practical view on how to do citizen science. Most recent of which we were co-editors of at the Citizen Science Lab, is The Science of Citizen Science, which has chapters covering a wide range of domains and also aspects such as data, ethics, etc. And you are very welcome to contact me at any time. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if I have any questions from the audience. And perhaps Martina can help me spot whether I have questions on YouTube from anybody.
There are not questions on YouTube, but there are some entries in the Padlet application. So if you want to check it and have a comment, you are welcome to do that.
Certainly, I will do so and see what people have been sharing. And I thank you for engaging with that while you're remote. It's always nice to have these interactive conversations with each other, and kudos to the team at a recap that did their best to support us all virtually in bringing all speakers together today. And hopefully in the future we can be meeting in person. So Public Lab is a fantastic example of engaging with communities. That's a beautiful example. Thank you for sharing that one. Defining the research question and with regards to ethics, it's a wonderfully powerful approach that when you have ethical considerations within your research, that you actually go to the people who would be touched by that, implicated by that, and get their involvement at an early stage about what they find is important and how they would like things to be handled or taken into account. Levels of anonymity or the sharing of data or unexpected privacy considerations. To give you an example that I had not anticipated, a piece of work that a colleague of mine was doing in the Arctic Circle in the north of the US, in Barrow, Alaska, with local hunter-gatherers looking at the impacts of climate change on their hunting patterns because they go out on the ice. And their feedback was very strongly, I'm not going to share that data with somebody else because my hunting skills are my competitive advantage. And if I share too much of my reports, then other hunters will benefit from this, disadvantaging me in the hunt. So the spoils of the hunt are shared with the whole community once back at the community, but the hunters took a great amount of pride in their own skills, and were therefore not willing to share some levels of detail, some of the details. So very interesting things can emerge from that. Computing capacity, helping process data literally with volunteered computing is an excellent example. But people have a greater propensity to help analyze data than you might expect. The OCR example is a really nice one in reporting mistakes in machine-produced text data. Another one to mention is that there's some nice examples of human in the loop in machine learning or artificial intelligence projects, where the crowd is helping to gather the machine learning data set. An example of that is the plastic tide, which was drone images of the coastline that had close-up photos of the plastic pollution that was found. And the public engaged with this by identifying this is a fishing net, this is hard blue plastic, this is a soft plastic bag. And they trained the machine learning, they developed the machine learning training data set, which is now a very powerful algorithm that can be applied for identifying plastics in a coastal context. So some great examples. Thank you all for sharing those. I hope that you continue to do so I will leave this Padlet live for a while. So over the next day or two, if you continue to have thoughts and would like to share them with each other, it's a great opportunity to see others' creative thinking in this context where you might push the boundaries of your research a little bit wider open for engagement. Martina, I will once again glance at you and see if there's other questions that have come in.
I'm checking, but it seems there are no questions. But I have one question. If you can briefly maybe recommend a source for people that would like to get engaged in some project and they don't know where. Is there any list of activities of citizen science, for example, in Netherlands, or is there any for a global science project?
The two best places to go at the moment, the EU Citizen Science Platform, which I introduced in the slides, that's EU-citizen.science. That's the actual URL of the platform. It's aimed much more to practitioners' audience, but there you can find a large range of citizen science projects that you could filter by your own country, and you're invited to engage with them. But as a participant, the best platform to go to is SciStarter, scistarter.com, which showcases citizen science projects that you can do, which can be filtered by country, by region, by subject matter. You can choose comets, or you can choose butterflies, and find something that suits you and your hobbies and your interests.
Great. Nice to know. Thank you very much, Margaret, for a great promotion of citizen science and for all the lovely examples and all the reasons why we should really keep our fingers crossed for citizen science. And also good luck with your own work to strengthen the position of citizen science in Netherlands.
Thank you very much.